Hi everyone, Lior is here with another Jumpstart Lightning episode. Today we are continuing our ArcBox Nuts and Bolts video series, and I have Zaid with me to talk to me about everything that is between Open Service Mesh, GitOps, and everything that we have stored for you in the new flavor for ArcBox DevOps. Stay tuned. Hi everyone, Lior is here with another Jumpstart Lightning episode. Today I have Zaid with me to talk to me about everything that is Open Service Mesh, GitOps, and all the cool things that we have in the new flavor for ArcBox. Zaid, how are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, Zaid, I was excited to talk to you. This is the first time that I'm having you on the show. But for those of you who don't know you, who you are and what is it that you do?
Sure. I'm Zaid Mohammed, working as consultant on Azure Cloud and AI team in Microsoft. My role is to help customers move to Azure and be successful.
So, move to Azure and be successful. But one thing that you're doing in order to do that, you joined the Jumpstart team a few months ago. Before we're kicking things off, just want to ask you, how's the experience thus far?
Yeah, it's been amazing. I mean, I wanted to be part of it for a long time, and Arc is in a space which is growing a lot, and I'm very excited to be able to contribute to this.
And Zaid, today I invited you because you've been an instrumental part for the new flavor that we developed for ArcBox DevOps. And today we are here to talk about that. So, really to kick things off, share with me the experience, share with me what is it that we did in the context of ArcBox DevOps and all the things that you worked on specifically in this workstream.
Yep, thanks for that. So we have what essentially we wanted to achieve with DevOps. We have already done all the groundwork with respect to setting up the environment and doing the infrastructure part of things. But what we wanted to give the ability for the customers and partners, how they can leverage key functionalities inside the Kubernetes cluster. So you can
Mhm,
have a Kubernetes cluster which could be lying anywhere, right? So where do we start with? We start with first connecting that cluster. That's what we
mhm,
are achieving with respect to our Azure Arc for Kubernetes, right? Once we have connected the cluster, people want a way to be able to manage those clusters.
mhm,
These could be related to applications deployment, or these could be related to admin or the configuration capabilities.
mhm.
So that is where what we did was we wanted to showcase the capability around GitOps.
And specifically, Zaid, you worked on, and we're seeing the architecture diagram for the new flavor in front of us, but you specifically worked on the application piece, like the thing that we are manipulating as we are building this, or as we are developing this flavor, right?
Correct. So we wanted to make sure that the end user experience, we wanted to give as close as possible to a real world scenario. So that is why we wanted to have multiple clusters, as well as have an application which could be a closer to a real world scenario application. And there they can actually implement scenarios like implementing traffic policies, or there could be scenario right where you want to do a deployment of
Mhm,
multiple version of the application. So as you can see here, what we have done is we have leveraged Capi cluster here.
mhm,
And on top of Capi cluster, we are leveraging GitOps configurations to deploy the code. So that is the first step what we are trying to achieve.
mhm.
And post that, we are leveraging GitOps again to implement traffic policies. This is to implement service mesh implementation
Mm.
inside our cluster.
And Zaid, service meshes, specifically if we're touching on that area, service meshes has been somewhat of a, I want to say, a newer concept to this world of DevOps or SRE practices. It's not something that, it's still not something that is widely adopted in the wild, right? Obviously, there are multiple projects around service mesh, but before we're diving into, the actual implementation of what we did in DevOps, um, why service mesh? Like, why do people care about this?
Yeah, really great question. So over the last few years, we've seen the microservice architecture has become increasingly popular,
Mhm.
especially for the Kubernetes-based containerized applications,
Yep.
right? So the service mesh allows developers to abstract the logic governing the service-to-service communication into a separate layer from the application infrastructure.
Mm.
So that is one of the biggest advantage which you get. And also with respect to Kubernetes admin, they wanted a solution with which they could apply policies, right? And these
Mhm.
could be policies which govern the communication between the services. You can talk about ingress policies for the traffic coming inside the inside the cluster. These could be egress policies for the traffic going outside the cluster.
Hmm.
Also, there are policies which are related to have communication between the services. So what
Hmm.
we're going to see in the demo later today, the policies around splitting the traffic, like the traditional canary or the blue-green deployment scenario,
And
right?
Zaid, it's kind of interesting because obviously I'm like you, I'm also talking to customers, spending a lot of time talking to customers, and full disclosure, my wife, she's also a developer, and I'm talking to her about some of the things that they're doing in at her workplace, and it's kind of interesting to see how developers are, or how DevOps and developers, or SRE and developers are, those worlds are starting to mesh together. Sometimes you don't see a clear line between those. And I think service mesh is one of those things, or one of those technology or architecture that really flushes those jello or interaction points, right? So that's
Okay.
something that personally I'm very fascinated about. So just wanted to share what you do. And what is it that we did as part of DevOps for highlighting this?
Okay. So with respect to DevOps, as we spoke earlier, we
Hmm.
implemented an application, simple application with respect to which you should be able to have the ability to see all these features implemented. So what we have is we have a bookstore application where we have a V1 version of the application and the V2 version of the application, a traditional scenario, right?
Yeah.
Where developers develop and they want to go ahead and test a new version. What additional thing which we are doing as part of this setup, as you can see here, we are leveraging GitOps for not only do the initial setup of the application, but we are
Mhm.
also using it to have the configuration. And in this case, specifically, we're talking about service mesh policies. So we are implementing service mesh traffic policy
Mm.
using a GitOps flow inside the cluster.
You know, like you, I've been doing GitOps demos from the early days of Azure Arc Enabled
Yep.
Kubernetes, and it was always focusing on the deployment piece. It was
Yep.
never about what is it that you can do with GitOps after you already have the application deployed on that cluster, no matter if it's a single cluster or a fleet of clusters. What is it that you can actually do? I think that this one is a very good use case to show the power of GitOps, but also with the combination of service mesh. So tell me something, Zaid. What was our implementation to this? Like, how do Microsoft are approaching this, and how did we approach this in the flavor?
Sure, sure. Yep, that's a really good question. I mean, I'll start with the GitOps flow to just to give a background to the people
Yeah.
who are new to GitOps, and then I'll specifically talk about what we all did as well.
Yep.
So we basically start with somewhere outside, right? As we said earlier, we're talking about any cluster, so customers can have any Kubernetes cluster as long as these are CNCF certified Kubernetes cluster.
Hmm.
You can onboard them as an Azure Arc Kubernetes cluster.
Yep.
Once you have onboarded it, the user is going to create GitOps configuration. And once they create the GitOps configuration and deploy on their cluster,
Hmm.
this basically spins up the Flux agent and multiple controllers inside the cluster.
Hmm.
What they do is they basically listen to the Git repository. And based on whatever user has configured on the Git repository, it'll pick those code base and it'll go ahead and do the application deployment. So this will be the
Hmm.
V1 or the desired state of the deployment, right?
Okay.
So this is the traditional one. But then we also want the ability where any change which happen, right? I don't want to have a separate pipeline to implement the changes. That is where the developers are making any application code change and they are merging it to the repository.
Hmm.
Flux is aware of it. As you mentioned earlier, it's listening to those changes. It picks up the changes and it goes ahead and does the deployment on your environment.
And this also goes to configurations, right? It's not just about the deployment of the application. It's also relevant for if you want to make a change on an application that is already deployed, whether it was deployed via a GitOps process, which is what we did in DevOps, or just deployed on the cluster, basically.
That's a really good point because when you will actually come inside the cluster and when you will go through our Jumpstart scenario for DevOps for
Hmm.
ArcBox, you will see we are not only doing GitOps for doing the application deployment, we are also leveraging it for service mesh policies, and also
Mm.
we are also giving you a scenario around RBAC.
So
So
I see Zay, that you're already showing me the portal. So I think it's time for you to actually show me the magic. Like, how do things look like?
yep. So what you see here is I already pre-deployed ArcBox DevOps flavor for DevOps, and I have this CAPI cluster as we saw in the architecture and diagram initially.
Yep.
that we're going to leverage CAPI cluster to see all the functionalities what we have implemented.
Hmm.
And we already spoke about it in the initial conversation with Dale and team, that how we have leveraged the extensions and other functionalities. But in this session, I'm going to focus on these two ones. The first one is Flux. This is the
Hmm.
extension which is used to implement the GitOps functionality
Hmm.
inside the cluster. And then the second one is OSM, which is for the open service mesh, which is a Microsoft implementation based on the sidecar container, which we have implemented inside this cluster.
And it needless to say, right, this is
Yeah,
based on Flux v2, the new implementation that we have for GitOps. So we already included that.
correct. We have updated our code base to make sure we have the latest Flux v2 included in our GitOps implementation.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yep. And as you can see, we have implemented multiple configurations
Mm.
with respect to GitOps inside our cluster. But the two which we are focusing in this session is related to the bookstore app.
Mhm.
So this is the config which we use to actually make the deployment to the cluster. So as you
Mm.
can see, it is listening to a particular GitHub repository.
Mhm.
And then if you go to the customizations, you will see which particular path inside the repository it's
Mm.
actually looking for the configuration file. So this is the place where basically your application manifest or the configuration file should be there for the Flux controller to kick in and the GitOps flow process to
And,
start.
and you know, Zay, this is part of the one of the improvements that we have in Flux v2. In Flux v1, we didn't
Correct.
have that basically that view, that level of granularity.
That's
So
true.
that's something cool that we're able to now see as part
Yep.
of v2 implementation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, because you were easily able to differentiate like what is my path where I'm listening to, which you
Yeah.
will see when you actually go to OSM1. So this is the other config, which is for the service mesh policies, and you will see the repository is the same, which we are using.
Mhm.
And when you jump on the customization, you will see that we are going to a specific path where we actually have the OSM
That's
specific
cool.
policies for the application.
All right. That's cool. So what is it that we can do with that?
Yeah, so now I'll quickly go back and show you the application which we have been talking about for so far.
Mhm.
So we have this application deployed, as we spoke about. We have a bookstore application deployed, and
Mhm.
whenever a book is sold, you will see these counters getting increased. And as we
Mhm.
can see here right now, there's no traffic which is coming on bookstore v2. It's only on the v1 version of the application.
Yep. Yep.
And we
Yep.
can see the same thing from the logs as well, kubectl, that all the traffic is going to bookstore v1.
Okay.
So
All right. So basically, Zaid, just kind of to wrap it up, what we're seeing right now is the application that was deployed via the GitOps configuration, right? We
yeah,
have two versions, version one, version two. There's no traffic going into version two right now. Okay. So what
correct.
is it that we want to test?
Yeah. So what we want to test, which we covered initially in terms of the functionality. So as we can see here, this is the same repo which we saw in the configuration where we
Hmm.
have a traffic policy applied, and you can see the same path which we saw here, OSM
Yep.
sample. And
Yep.
now what we're going to do is we're going to say, as a developer, I don't want all the traffic to go to the V2 version. I want only the 25% of the traffic to go to the V2 version, and I'm
Gotcha.
going to commit this change. And as soon as you commit this change, the GitOps flow should kick in, and I should be seeing a change here where the V2 version should start seeing an increase in the counter.
That's super cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
And we also
also,
see that on the log. Yeah.
yeah, and also you can see it in the log on the left-hand side that there are a few of the calls which are coming now on the V2.
So this is basically the start of the blue green process, right? When you're actually testing the functionality of the application, sorry, of
Correct.
the version, right?
Yep.
Making sure that it's not blowing up and everything is okay. All right.
Perfect. And now once the customer or the early birds, what we call, right, they're happy and the developer is happy, what they essentially want to do is they want to go back here and they want to make the change and make sure that all the traffic goes to the,
That's
sorry,
so version
yeah,
one supposed to be right zero. And so
yeah,
what we're doing right now is basically switching everything to V2, right?
yes, I'm diverting all
Okay.
the traffic to V2 version because I'm happy with the changes now. And I want a GitOps flow to kick in again and make sure that my V1 version doesn't get any traffic now. It only goes to V2. So
That's
now
cool.
this should kick in and we should see this counter gets freezed now and there'll only be an increase here. And we can already see that on the left-hand side that all the traffic now is going to V2 version of the application.
So just make sure that the audience understand as part of ArcBox DevOps, we actually baked all this stuff for you, right? So all you need to do is you're going to get the GitOps configuration, right? You're going to get everything. But that's part of the reason also, Zaid, that we created the second cluster, right? We also have another cluster as part of the deployment. So you can actually do things maybe in a more manual fashion, so to speak, so you can learn that yourself.
Correct. So the good thing is when you actually go to the README scenario, which we have published, is you will see that whatever I have done today, you can follow along and do it in the CAPI cluster. And also we have provisioned additional cluster, which is a K3S cluster, where you actually want to implement things from scratch. That is, you want to deploy the Flux extension, you deploy the GitOps configurations. So we have automated it and provided a script which you can leverage and run those scripts and do all of these things in action and play around with it.
So I really like the versatility of what we did. It's not just about kind of give you a cooking show environment that all you need to do is just change a Git repository, which makes
Yep.
it looks easy. But you got to ask yourself, do you actually learn something by doing that? So I like the versatility of us basically providing another stack of Kubernetes infrastructure so you can go and break it yourself. So
Correct. Yep. And we have given another application as well, a simpler application with respect to HelloArc, which you can play around with. And also going back to your point, we have also given RBAC configurations to play around so that this is not only related to the application, we can also control the RBAC configuration inside the cluster. So you can do that as well.
So, one GitOps or one GitOps implementation to rule them all, basically,
Yeah.
as part of ArcBox DevOps. So, Zaid, I wanna wrap things up. This was a very cool demo, and it's a very comprehensive demo, and I'm super happy that, we were developing this because it really highlight one of the key elements that we wanted to emphasize with ArcBox DevOps, which is how do you take this type of stuff and bring that to your environment? Obviously, as part of Jumpstart, we're not going to develop everything that you're going to have in your environment, but we want to give you the food for thought. We want to give you that, those that ground area for you to explore. So that's basically what you did.
Yeah, I mean, completely true. I mean, this unlocks the powerful options as you were speaking earlier about the developers, SRE, and the DevOps engineer to implement features like GitOps and Service Mesh on their certified KX clusters.
So Zaid, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I'm excited to have you on the Jumpstart team, and you've been doing fantastic work on this application implementation that we are all enjoying very much. For the Jumpstart audience, I do want to ask you, like and subscribe. We've been doing this for a while, and we're seeing a lot of support. So help us grow, help us bring people like Zaid and the rest of the Jumpstart team to come to talk to us. It really helps the channel to grow. So we appreciate it a lot. So make sure that you're liking and subscribing. And obviously, we're going to make sure all the links are in the description below. Zaid, before I'm saying goodbye, where do people can reach out to you, and how do people get in touch with you?
Sure, I've given my LinkedIn handle there. Zaid Muhammad is the same for the GitHub as well. You can reach out to me there. And also, we are looking forward to any feedback on the Arc repository. Give it a spin and provide us with the feedback, raise issues. We are happy to hear. Thank you.
100%. Thank you so much, Zaid, for joining me. And thank you for the Jumpstart audience for staying and watching this great episode. So thank you, Zaid. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.